The weight we carry into old age. Buddhist wisdom. Some people reach their 70s and become lighter. Others become heavier every year. The strange part is, it has almost nothing to do with age itself. Most of us have spent our lives believing that aging is something that happens to us. That the difficulty of growing older comes from what is taken away. The health, the roles, the noise of a busy life going quiet. And so the natural response has been to hold on, to manage, to keep things from slipping. But there is something most teachings about aging stop just short of saying. What if the difficulty was never about losing things? What if it was about carrying them? Imagine carrying a small stone in your pocket. At first, you barely notice it. Then years pass. You forget it is there. Eventually, you begin to think the heaviness belongs to your body, not the stone. Much of what people suffer from in old age is like that. Not age itself. Something they have carried for so long, they no longer realize they are carrying it. There is a belief most people carry into the later years without examining it. That piece is waiting on the other side of things going right. If the children call more, if the body cooperates, if people finally understand what you sacrificed, if the house is quiet in the right way and not the wrong way. This belief feels reasonable. It is not. It is one of the oldest forms of suffering, and the Dharma has a very simple way of describing it. The mind that grasps is the mind that suffers. Not because grasping is a character flaw. Because grasping is exhausting. Because the things being grasped cannot by their nature stay still. Consider what happens when someone spends decades as the person who holds things together. The family, the household, the plan for how things will unfold. This role feels like identity, and for a long time it functions. But life is not cooperating indefinitely with any individual's plan. Children make choices that were not in the blueprint. Health shifts in directions that were not invited. The world refuses to hold the shape that was built for it. And the mind, still gripping, begins to exhaust itself against this. The suffering that emerges is not old age. It is the gap between what is and what the mind decided should be. Someone once described it this way. Imagine spending 40 years with your hands pressed against a door to keep it from opening. You become so identified with the pressing that you forget what is on the other side. You forget that you could simply step back. The pressing is the suffering, not the door. But knowing this intellectually is not the same as something actually releasing. What allows a grip that has been held for decades to finally loosen? There is a specific kind of suffering that belongs almost entirely to the later years of life. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive all at once. It accumulates quietly in the space between what happened and what the mind keeps returning to. A woman in her 70s sits by the window. The afternoon is quiet. Tea is on the table. Nothing is wrong. Yet she is not really there. She is back in a conversation from 20 years ago, replaying it, adjusting the words, searching for an ending that never came. The room is peaceful. The mind is not. The event is finished. Yet something keeps returning. Most of the painful stories people carry into old age share this quality. They are not happening now, but they are treated as if they are. Rehearsed, revisited, replayed in slightly different versions to see if a different ending can be found. There is also a more specific form of this, harder to name, because it is so quiet. The story of who you believed you were supposed to become. Not the life you wanted exactly, but the life that should have been available to you if things had gone differently. If certain doors had opened. If certain people had stayed. The mind holds this imagined life alongside the actual one. Compares them constantly without announcing that it is comparing. And the actual life, with all of its specific texture, its real relationships, its particular kinds of love and difficulty, begins to feel like a consolation prize. This comparison is invisible suffering. No one caused it. No one needs to apologize for it. But it is real. And it steals a great deal of peace from the years that remain. See if you can notice, somewhere in your own story, the version of life you never stopped quietly mourning. That recognition may be what is actually available today. Two things are commonly offered as remedies for this. The first is forgiveness. The second is acceptance. Neither is wrong. But notice something. The one trying to forgive is often the same one still holding the wound. The one trying to accept is often still measuring whether they are doing so correctly. The grip remains, only under a more spiritual name. What the teaching actually points to is something prior to both of these. Not a technique applied by the self, but a direct seeing that changes the nature of the self doing the seeing. One teacher spent decades pointing towards something remarkably simple. Venerable Veen Min called it returning phenomena to phenomena. The meaning is not complicated. A memory appears before you invite it. A feeling appears before you create it. A regret appears before you ask for it. Then if it is not fed, it changes and passes, just as every sound passes. Every breath passes. Every evening passes. The suffering of old age, looked at closely, is not caused by loss. It is caused by the ongoing attempt to maintain something that experience keeps refusing to confirm. The need to have been understood. The need for a different past. The need for life to acknowledge what was given to it. These needs feel permanent. They are not. They arise when certain conditions are present, and they pass when those conditions change. Someone in their 70s described it once in terms that had nothing to do with Buddhism. She said she had spent most of her life afraid that if she stopped expecting certain things from the people around her, the things she had given would somehow be canceled. As though letting go of the account meant the transactions had never happened. She realized late that the transactions had happened regardless. The love was given. The years were lived. Nothing about releasing the expectation of being repaid changed the reality of what had been real. What changes when a person genuinely sees this is not the story. The story stays. What changes is the exhausting work of keeping the wound open to be reviewed. The wound was real. The reviewing is optional. And most of the suffering is in the reviewing. There is a fear underneath all of this that rarely gets named directly. If I let go of needing to be understood, does that mean what I gave did not matter? If I stop carrying the old grief, am I betraying the things I lost? If I release the version of life that should have been, am I admitting that this life was enough, even when parts of it were genuinely hard? These are not small questions. They deserve to be taken seriously. The teaching is not that your suffering was small. It is not that the people who failed you were right. It is not that the life you actually lived was equivalent to everything you hoped for. Some lives have contained real difficulty, real loneliness, real loss that should not be minimized. But there is a distinction the Dharma keeps pointing toward between the original pain and the secondary pain. The original pain is what happened. That is real, and it does not need to be argued with. The secondary pain is the ongoing work of managing it, defending it, carrying it as something that must not be allowed to disappear. That secondary layer is what exhausts a life. And it is that layer, not the original pain, that can actually release. Here is something simple to consider in the next ordinary moment that presents itself. When the mind returns to a familiar story, the one about how things should have been different, or the person who never acknowledged what they owed you, see if the moment of return can itself be seen. Not to stop it, not to correct it, simply to see it. Because in that seeing, something quiet happens. The story is still there, but now the story is also being seen. The seeing does not belong to the story. It was not created by the story, and it does not need the story to resolve before it can be present. It does not need to be understood by anyone. It does not need the past to have gone differently. It is not diminished by what was not received. This seeing has been available all along. Underneath the weight, the people who move through the later years with something like peace are not the ones who had easier lives. Most of them did not. They are the ones who, at some point, stopped waiting for the accounting to come out right, stopped waiting for the recognition, stopped rehearsing the cases they had built over decades against the way things went. Not because the cases were wrong, but because they noticed what the rehearsing was costing them. Every morning spent relitigating the past is a morning that cannot be spent elsewhere. Every hour of energy used to maintain the version of life that should have happened is an hour that cannot be given to the life that is actually happening. Perhaps the woman by the window is still sitting there. The tea has gone cold. The conversation from 20 years ago has not resolved itself. But something is different now. She is not looking for the ending anymore. She is simply here. Old age asks a very specific question. Not what did you accomplish? Not what did you lose? But how much of what remains are you willing to actually be present for? There is no technique for this. No 7 steps. No system. There is only the direct recognition that the weight was never the life itself. Perhaps old age is not asking us to hold on more carefully. It is asking us to discover what was always here. The life was underneath it. It is still there. And if this kind of teaching is something you want to keep returning to, there is a place for that here.